Welcome to the Signature Leadership Show. I'm Jamie Mason Cohen, and we are here today with Brad Gosse. Now, the Signature Leadership Show is about helping world-class leaders uncover their authentic selves. And in the process, we uncover our authentic selves. And your signature is like a sign of nature. It's your authority in the world. It's your personal brand. And we're going to go through a process where we dive into a problem, reframe it as an opportunity, and by seeing how the expert does that, it will help us hopefully reframe our own challenges. Now, I asked Brad Gosse to be on the show in his environment, which is fascinating to me. This is the first time that I've done this show, this podcast, and this YouTube show live in someone's studio. And Brad has an extraordinary studio, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. Now, here's why I invited Brad on the show. Brad, to me, is a leader in his field, and he's a leading content creator with, and I could be wrong with this, he'll correct us after, with over 1.5 million followers on TikTok alone, several 100,000 on Instagram, YouTube. And what I love about what Brad does is he is, first of all, self-made in the sense that he has created several paths that years ago when we first met did not exist. So we met in about 2017 through a speaker group we were both in.
Yeah, we met in Philadelphia, but we live an hour away from each other in the Toronto area.
That's right. And we didn't even talk at first. We were amongst other speakers in that environment. And what stood out to me about you after the fact was we had one lunch, if I recall, and you talked about starting on this new TikTok thing, this platform that was just developing. And after that, you decided that you were going to become a comedian.
Yep.
You just made that choice to become a comedian.
Yeah.
Both of those things have taken off.
I ran away and joined the circus.
Literally, yeah. And so both of those things have grown significantly. So first of all, thank you for being a guest.
Thanks for coming.
Let's first start with what's a problem or opportunity that you're dealing with right now. There's no right or wrong with this. It's just an impression. And I'm going to see if we can connect some of the handwriting traits to make some progress on dealing with that in the next few minutes.
Okay. So I would say my biggest problem or opportunity, however we want to frame it, is trying to disconnect the comedy from the book writing. So sometimes I go on stage and I tell just jokes. I don't even pull out a book. And I often catch myself using the books as a crutch. So I might go up on stage and bring books with me because I know the books will kill. I know that the audience will love it if I pull out books. However, I want to do more stand-up where I don't pull out a book. So what will happen sometimes is I'll go out on stage, I'll start telling jokes. If the comedy's going really well, I won't pull out books. But if it's not going well, or if I'm not feeling it internally, I tend to use my books as a crutch on stage. So I'm trying to move past that to a place where I can go out and do, 10 minutes, a half an hour of comedy that doesn't rely on me reading books. That's the biggest thing I'm facing right now is doing, and I'm doing that more online, but it's like I'm still trying to find that. I'm trying to disconnect my comedy from putting it just into books and making children's style rhymes.
Got it. Okay. That's helpful. So let's look at the handwriting and then let's see if we can pull some of those ideas in. So the first thing we see in the signature is you have this very large central handwriting. So you see this with celebrities. You see this with people as diverse as Richard Branson to Oprah and Obama, not politically speaking. That large central handwriting tends to be public confidence.
Right.
Is that in front of people, you have the ability, the courage, I would say, to be your full outgoing self. Yet your handwriting itself is, even though it's printed and it's slightly to the left.
Okay.
So the combination is, what this shows is, I would say you're a situational extrovert.
Yep.
So that when you are in front of people, you can look like the life of the party. You have no problem of bringing it and being larger than life.
Yeah.
Even a little bit of a healthy ego. about really there's a lot of belief in yourself, in your confidence in yourself.
Yep.
About you believe you know it's right and you're going to go in that direction. When you're at home, like we are here, we're in your basement studio, you might not always be or feel the need to be constantly engaged with other people.
Right.
You are more inward looking.
Yep.
You are more, I would say, even argue that you are okay with being alone.
Yes.
And you need that to refresh, to come up with creative ideas. You're not so much a collaborator as you are a creator who then goes out in the world and shows your work.
Yep. That's right on the money. I'm an introvert most of the time.
Yes.
And I'm really good at masking as an extrovert when I need to.
That's right. And so if your signature is what you want the world to see and your writing is who you truly are, you're both of those identities. They both fit within this complex person that is Brad.
Yeah.
Yet that inward, which is your writing itself, that's who you are when no one's looking. That is more quiet, that's more inward looking, and that is also putting up certain walls until you really get to know people and trust them.
Yep.
You won't show your true self, and it takes time before you really trust people to allow them to see who you are, to show more vulnerability.
Yeah.
Vulnerability doesn't come easy, and I would say that part of that is in your signature, you're going to notice on that first letter is a B. So if you're noticing that B, if you notice on the bottom portion of it, it goes right back to the past, and there's a point. There's a point on the B, and that tends to be you're going back to the past. I know this might sound hard to believe. I've done this thousands of times. Mm-hmm. It tends to be quite accurate. You're going back to the past, deep into the past, into childhood. I would say this is elementary school age. You're going right back to the past, and you're analyzing in depth as to what happened. You're looking into the past, and then you're moving forward, and that line moves right forward into the future, all the way right into today with power. So you go from strength to strength, and that line is quite heavily written. So what that shows me is you might have some challenges in trusting because of what happened in elementary school all the way back, but yet you've taken that and you've turned that challenge into an opportunity to grow. It's actually made you stronger. That which does not kill me makes me stronger, the famous Nietzsche line. You live that.
Yeah.
And that resilience and that persistence actually goes to what we said earlier, which is you turn rejection into redirection. You are not embarrassed. You might have been as a kid. You've turned that into a way to get stronger through those negative and I would say unfair characterizations of you, of a pedophile, of this, all these crazy things that people, these trolls say online, or people who haven't even looked at what you do. It makes you stronger because of what's happened in the past. That deep analytical nature that you have is analyzing what's happened in the past and reforming it into the future. How are we doing so far?
Yeah, I think you're right on the money.
Okay. So now I want to take that moment of this deeply analytical ability. If you have this sharp point with on the lower case of a letter, in this case it's the B with Brad, and it's really sharp and it looks almost like a but on its side, or a V on its side actually, not an A.
Yeah.
And it's moving from left to right. It goes back to the past, that's the left, it goes right to the future. Then that's a sign of deeply analytical, that's that sharp wedge, and it's analyzing the past, it's moving into the future. Oprah had this too, actually, in her lowercase letters, and she's someone who went through some trauma as what she has described and moved forward. Now, the reason I bring this up, and the reason of all the different traits, I want to focus on this for a moment, is you said that the problem, or you said it's I call it an opportunity, you might have called it a problem, is you have these books as a crutch at times because this is what you're known for. This is like the artist who had big success with one style of art, and then that's what they're expected to do every time they go out there. It's the singer who's known for that big hit.
Yeah.
And then they have to feel like they're recreating that particular song on stages as if it's the first time for the next 20 years.
Yeah.
And that's why sometimes they move in different directions, because they feel constrained. They feel like they're imprisoned with their own success. So in what I'm hearing a little bit is you are feeling a little bit claustrophobic with your own success. And now that you see yourself based on proof that you are a comedian on the stages of Yuck Yucks in the US and beyond, your ambition is to grow into a more diverse comedy routine or trying new things because you're a creator and you're restless and you want to expand your repertoire of comedy beyond these books.
Yeah.
And yet you're grateful for these books, but beyond. So what I'm going to ask you is a question that taps into that. So I referenced a joke, or I would say irony. I wouldn't call it a joke so much. My friend Tom Rhodes, who's a successful comedian for over 3 decades, he said, not every joke has to be funny. That he tells stories that he says if good storytelling has alignment with the most effective comedians today. They're not always
Right.
ha-ha laughter. There's lessons to be learned that are almost like the Spartan effect. There's the horse. What's that called? The Trojan horse. Yeah. That sometimes it's masked within good storytelling, that there's something deeper and layered.
Right.
So the land acknowledgement is an example where you're making a point about society, a bit of hypocrisy that's clouded or it's cloaked in a Trojan horse type of joke. So I want to ask you a question, which is the type of questions I ask audiences when I'm getting them to think deeper from turning problems into opportunities. You talked about not wanting that as a crutch. And we talked about in your one trait, in your B, you have the ability to think highly, deeply analytically. And you're a highly reflective person to reflect back into the past and come through with strength. Here's a question for you, Brad. What's an example of when you've performed at your best on stage as a comedian? I gave the example of the indigenous story or the land acknowledgement as an example. When have you performed at your best in the past when you were not using the books as a crutch and got a response from the audience? What's a story or a joke that you did? Can you just give a brief example?
So that land acknowledgement joke is definitely one of them. Another one is just kind of mining my life for ideas. So that joke did really well in California. It did not so well in Omaha, Nebraska. But in Burbank, California, that joke killed. And I enjoyed telling it, even though I got some groans from the audience. The very next joke that I told was a joke about naming my Tesla Cosby. And so the joke is, for those of you who haven't heard it, when you buy a Tesla, they tell you to name the car in the Tesla app. And I was like, oh, what am I going to name this car? And then I came up with the idea to name it Cosby. And so I tell the joke on stage that I named my car Cosby because you don't hear it coming because it's electric. So that was another joke that did really well on a stage when I was ready to pull out books, but I had these kind of pre-prepared stories and jokes to tell, and they just went off really, really well. So that was, just a few months ago in Burbank, California.
Okay. So that's an example. So what I would, if I were coaching you in how to deal with that, I know a little bit about what you do.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes, and you're a brilliant coach, sometimes it's easier to coach others than it is yourself.
Yeah, of course it is.
If they see the obvious.
Yeah.
So I would ask, even when we leave here, to jot down or type out, because you like to do that, although I believe in writing down, we absorb more when we write things down, is to write down 3 instances in the past where you've performed at your best and got a response on some level, not using your book as an example, and to look for more of those opportunities moving forward.
Okay.
A few other things about your handwriting we could touch on. Now, this is an endless field. There's so many different areas we could touch upon here. I want to reiterate that one point about it does take time for people to get to know you. That is also through the shape of your actual writing. I told you in your Purple People Eater friend, if you print with large, powerful letters, this could mean several things. The one thing that it could mean is what we said, which is you sometimes put up walls or barriers for you to get to know people or for them. But yet when you get to know them, you're a devoted and committed friend. One of the reasons I say that is because I don't know what your signature says. It's just a big B. And that I don't see the rest of your name. I know the rest of your name. Some of the audience might know it, Brad Gosse.
Yeah. But it's just a B in a line.
It's just a B in a line.
Yeah.
So what that means with the printed handwriting is potentially that large B is you're confident in yourself. You're going to show people a part of yourself, but not all of it. You're more comfortable being seen than truly known by those who you haven't let in, who those haven't built that trust. And that is accentuated or amplified by the printed letters, which essentially is emotionally, I'm going to give you a certain part of me,
Yeah.
but not all of me.
Right.
And I've seen this with leaders too, this is boundaries, healthy boundaries.
Yeah.
Other people might see you as being a little bit aloof at first because of this. Not because when we met, I'm not going to keep my first impression of you. This is coming across at first as actually being a bit quiet, of not seeming like you have a lot to say, of being a listener first, of actually not being that approachable at first. And then once someone knows you, you will potentially give a little more of you.
Yep.
And it's got to be give and take. Now, that also often goes back to childhood. That could be a lack of feeling comfortable with vulnerability as a youth. I would say
this is where it turns into therapy. Folks.
This is when it's a little bit of therapy, and
I love this part.
Yes, and I would say that you have carved your own path, and that started when you were young. This is confidence in your I, in yourself. With that large I, it's about the same size letter. It's not overconfident. It's just a healthy, straight I. But that I, that's not tied, in this particular case, to following your mother's path or your father's path. I would say, actually, when it comes to the father, this shows that you are not overly tied to what your father wanted for you. You created your own path. It's not to say there's a negative interpretation of who your father is today. It just could mean that straight up and down line that you've chosen your own path that's separate from the path that a parent has wanted for you early on, or what they either said. There's a lack of parental, in this case, father's influence on your path.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when I was raised mostly by my mother. So my parents split up when I was 10, and I lived with my mom, and I saw my dad every other weekend. So he had very little influence in my childhood. So that would be very accurate. Yeah.
Yeah. And let me just reemphasize, that is not what you think of your dad today. This is just potentially, we put these elements together.
Yeah, you don't have to tiptoe. It's all good. It's all, you know what? Like the funny thing with me is that because we're doing this, I'm open. But yeah, I get what you're saying, but yeah, from a childhood perspective, my mom had more of an influence on me growing up than my dad did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yet you've become who you've become. You're really successful. You're driven. You're motivated. You're deeply reflective and analytical. You've taken what's happened in the past, which is a combination, like for all of us, both good and also challenging.
Yeah.
And you've created this extraordinary career and life for yourself. You know, also as a father and as a partner, and you have all of these wonderful traits that I know of you, both professionally and personally. So, you know, those challenges that might have happened growing up, both from your father or, you know, and your mother, not in a positive or negative way, those shaped you to who you've become today.
Sure. Yeah.
So in summary, a few things are: you're deeply analytical about the past, and that analytical component of you reflects back deep in the past all the way to childhood, but it brings back those lessons and reframes them into positives.
Yep.
Into making you stronger, into what you said at the beginning, which was how you deal with potential embarrassment or rejection. You have this ability to turn it around to work for you.
Yeah.
And I believe that your father and mother helped shape that person who you are.
Yeah, definitely.
And we also talked about being more comfortable being seen, but not always known until you really get to know someone.
Yeah.
You put up these emotional barriers. And the last thing I'll say is you can forgive, you don't always forget. And those emotions, I think, are sometimes helpful in comedy, or more specifically in creativity, because we didn't talk about your emotions, and that vulnerability that people might not see, it's there. There are emotions, but those emotions, I think, are sublimated into your work. And the reason I say that is because you really press strongly when you write, and that is emotion, that's energy,
Right.
and that still waters run deep. So beneath sometimes this stoic facade is someone who feels deeply, who reflects back, and is got a great sense of humor, a really unique sense of humor, also has a deeply serious side,
Yeah.
and who reflects on the bigger picture just as much as you see the light or see the humor in the day to day.
Yeah. I'm as serious as AIDS, which is not that serious anymore because it's curable. So,
So, what did you find useful or insightful about that?
well, I would say you've told me you've told me things I know about myself. So because I'm analytical and I look within a lot, everything you've told me is true. So I would say that it's more confirmation than insight, because it's like, okay, you found some things that I know to be true about myself, but I find it interesting how you talk about sort of the you can forgive but you don't forget. For me, that's pretty accurate. I hold grudges for a very long time, and it's not about, like, if someone does me wrong, I wouldn't say that forgiving is necessarily the right word. I write them off very quickly. I have a habit of, I will cut people out of my life. What you wrong me in one way that I consider to be, serious. So for me, it's usually if someone is extremely critical or insulting. If someone who I have let into my life insults me, I will cut them out and they will be dead to me. So I wouldn't call that forgiveness, because if I'm doing that to you, that's not me forgiving you. That's just me putting you in a box so that I never have to feel that energy from you again. I'm extremely, like, I'm very quick to just cut people out. And it's and when I say people, I mean family. Like, I will cut out family if they're insulting to me. They die in my mind. And because I protect my ego and my confidence, I guard it with extreme prejudice. So if somebody comes at me and attacks me in that way, where because I built my confidence from zero, I was a high school dropout. I was told as a kid I wouldn't really have a lot of I wouldn't have a lot of promise for my future, right? So when I became, successful, I built up layers of confidence for myself along the way. And so when somebody, that's a thing that I guard very closely. And I talk about ego a lot because people use it as a bad word, but I believe that your ego helps you. And having a powerful ego makes you more likely to take risks and take on challenges that other people might not take, because your ego says, no, you can do that. So when someone appears to be attacking that, like, I just cut them out. They're gone. And I've done it multiple times, much to the surprise of the other people around me, where that person is just dead to me. And it's a weird thing to say, but that's the way I operate. Is the minute I realize you're not on the journey with me, you're gone. If you're trying to derail what I'm doing, you're done.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, there's a part of you with your T bars in the second line on the word that. There's an upward stroke, and it's really forceful. And that combination is actually being an optimist. It's not necessarily seeing. I would argue it's goal oriented. It's not seeing the worst in people. It's, at the end of the day, there's a certain hopefulness and optimism in how you see life.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I love my life. I love my career. I love where everything's going. I'm optimistic about the future. I don't really have a lot of room for self-doubt or for, a negative projection into the future, because I believe the more negativity you project into the future, the more negativity you get in your future. And if you see something happening that's bad, it will happen. And if you see something happening that's good, it will happen. So my outlook has always been extremely positive and optimistic.
Yeah. And I would say visionary, right? Like your T bars are not even touching on the top. That strong stroke right on the top, that tends to be someone who is literally reaching for the stars,
Right.
and often achieves them with that optimism and that powerful force, that energetic force.
Yeah.
What do you want to be celebrating 1 year from now?
That's a good question. I think I want to be celebrating more of the same, if that makes any sense. Like, I'm already doing well. I'm happy with where I am. I would like to be, a year from now, I'd like to be doing, 2 to 5 times the book sales that I'm doing now, have, a larger audience, maybe to the same factor. And I'd like to be doing more live performances, but I'm also prepared to kind of not do that, because these tours that I've gone on have kind of been self-funded. They've been like they're not money making tours, they're money losing tours. So when I say I'm a stay-at-home comedian, I say it because in this room I make the most money, making videos, making books, going live, doing all the things that I do in this room are the money making activities. And getting on a plane and going to Los Angeles to do a comedy festival was actually financially was upside down. I spent more money than I made. I didn't make any money in that process, because as a Canadian I couldn't get paid in the US. So I had to forego any fees. Like, I just gave back. I said, don't pay me. Give me a $0 contract. I'm coming out of my own dime, because I don't have a visa yet. So if I'm celebrating any kind of live success, I hope that comes with some type of maybe visa or something along those lines. But for me, it would just be more of the same. It would be publishing more successful books, taking more risks, and maybe finding a couple of new avenues for doing what I'm doing, but monetizing it well.
Okay. Wonderful.
That's vague, but
yeah, I think that's honest.
Yeah.
And you're doing extraordinary, and you continue to grow, and you are probably the most consistent creator I know amongst our circle of friends and colleagues and associates within speaking or creators of different kinds. So I want to thank you. I think if we go right back to the beginning of this conversation, that idea of quality happens after quantity. Of it's okay. It maybe not to your extent, but I think I could possibly learn a little bit from this. Is don't be afraid to lean into being a little more polarizing, and being in the middle has its value, but playing it safe doesn't necessarily help you grow. And also, you are an example, a quintessential example of cutting through rejection, of temporary failure, of constantly iterating, of finding whatever that niche is, about being the one-off to being sui generis, one of a kind in the world. That doesn't happen. It could happen overnight, but often it happens through some of the things we've spoken about today. It's accumulation of all the different chances that you've taken to get to that point. And we talked about your handwriting analysis. Of the thing that really I took away was your resilience of looking back to the past, of reflection, and then coming back with strength to strength and carving your own path.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Looking at my handwriting, tell me something negative, like really negative. Tell me something bad about it that, like, and I'm not afraid to self-reflect here. So, like, I know you don't always go in this direction with people, so I'm going to challenge you to go in this direction a little bit. Take me to the dark place.
When you write your T-bar, your first T-bar, is that going from left to right or right to left?
Left to right.
It's going from left to right. Okay.
I do the bottom, the stick first, and then I do the T.
Well, you might argue that, and again, I couch this and I qualify it because handwriting is not, it's highly accurate, but with any assessment, It could be that confidence can easily slip into a little bit of arrogance, a little bit of being a know-it-all. That large central writing, that is a significant ego. And arrogance I would describe as being sometimes a know-it-all, not a learn-it-all, in the sense of being closed off to other ideas if you feel that you're right.
Yep.
And that with the printed writing, which is not necessarily stubborn, but like very abrupt and direct in your approach, the combination of a little bit of, or potentially arrogance, could turn some people off who you do want to build a relationship with professionally or as a friend or beyond, because they might misinterpret that confidence as being pushed a bit too far.
Sure.
And what I've learned in another area of, it's called the leadership circle. So it looks at what the best leaders in the world, their strengths and their weaknesses, or we call it areas of growth or reactive tendencies. There's 11 reactive tendencies, which are areas in leadership that, based on the data, this is a different kind of data, that data, looking at 500,000 leaders, the one area that can block your growth is arrogance. Because when you close down yourself, because the ego almost becomes clouded to what other people are giving you, other experts are telling you, it's very hard to grow if you're putting up those walls. And because the writing is so printed and it's very masculine and strong, it's almost as if you've got to be careful that that level of those walls and that arrogance do not become a buffer or become erected. These are words that might make them into your books. They're not obstacles to when you say at the end of this, you said, I want more of what I have. Right. So I would challenge you and say, if you can find a way to humble yourself at times, even to ideas or people who are challenging you, that would be beneficial to grow more of the same. I think you're so talented that more of the same is more of the same within your bubble that you've created for yourself. How could you open yourself up more? Because another way you could describe arrogance is not only being a know-it-all at times, it's also what got me here is going to get me there. So it's doing more of the same. Even though you said you want to break out of reading these books, that might take a little humility of seeking out other ideas. Not necessarily that you might not take those ideas. Other people who might challenge your own ideas. And so that very large handwriting, which is about 2.5 times the size of your writing, would be considered confidence. If you see this, if I was to measure it, it's about 4 times the size of even your largest letter, your I, which might bleed into arrogance.
You're right. That's why I wanted to have this conversation, because that is, again, 100% accurate. I am definitely guilty of being arrogant. It happens to me more often than I would admit. Sometimes I have a hard time crossing the line from confidence to arrogance and coming back. And I've actually injected some of the arrogance into my comedic persona. So because I know that that's part of me, I lean into it a little bit in the comedy, because I know that it helps me to. It's a part of me, and I think I created it as a defense mechanism for me to be, because confidence to me started out as something that I faked because I didn't have it. So I started faking it, and then I realized that I got good results from that, and so the faked confidence became authentic confidence, and that has crossed over the line into arrogance more times than I would probably admit. But I also have learned to leverage that part of that arrogant part into the comedy to make it funny, but it's more real. It's a realer part of me than I would admit normally. So that's why I wanted to ask you that question, because it's I know you normally lean more into the positive stuff. I want to know what it is about me that could be improved, and you touched on it, and it's not something that I'm afraid to admit. I know that I can be arrogant. It's something that I want to work on, but it's also something that I've leveraged into a persona a little bit. So I can almost be too arrogant in my, we'll call it persona, character, whatever it is. The real me is not the me that you see doing, comedy on stage or on video. That's partially the real me with some parts amped up. Some of those parts are, the part of me that acts like I'm monotone and I don't really have a lot of inflection in my speech when I do comedy. And part of that is an arrogance, where, for instance, sometimes I'll be talking to, a younger person on a video chat website or something like that, and I'm recording it, and they'll talk about their mom, and I'll kind of immediately lean into, your mom sounds hot, can I have her number? The arrogant part of me comes out in the comedy, but it's done in a way where it also reminds me of that arrogance, because I know that it's a part of me. So you nailed it. Well done.
Thank you. And what you just said is also, like I was saying, you've got great self-awareness of analytical abilities about yourself, because you're looking back into the past with that sharp point on the B. And you might be thinking, this is a lot to be talking about with one stroke, but this is why I love handwriting after all these years, is because it opens people up to discuss themselves, to look at themselves. Like you said earlier, it might not be an insight, but it's reinforcing what they know. Now it's gotten to the point where you're saying, yeah, this is something I want to work on.
Yeah.
Right. And that was you. I mean, I just pointed it out. That signature is what you want the world to see.
Yeah.
Because your writing is not arrogant. Your writing is confident. There's that difference.
Right.
So that persona that you just referenced.
Because I sign books. They go out, right?
Yes. And so that celebrities often have this larger than life arrogant signature. Look at Drake's handwriting. Your signature looks very similar to the size, the pressure, and the shape.
Right.
Is Drake like that with his buddies who he's grown up with? We don't know, unless you're personally friends with him. But there's this larger than life image that performers sometimes take on as part of their identities. Right. It's still part of who they are, but it's not the full picture.
The only thing I'm taking away from this is that I'm exactly the same as Drake. I'm exactly the same as Drake. That's what I'm taking away from this.
So I'd love to end this on this note, because with handwriting, just like any coaching, it's beneficial to reflect on this. That's a big part of it. I would love to challenge you as we're moving into the end of a year, moving into a new year, when it comes to this trait of possibly having arrogance that could be a block or obstacle to growth, to doing more of what you want, even exceeding your own expectations. The question for you, Brad, is what's one thing you can do right now that would be a game changer in minimizing that arrogance in order to open yourself up to your full potential in the area of stand-up comedy?
I think some of the things I've been considering that the arrogance might prevent me from doing is more training, more asking for more help and more coaching from other comics. One of my good friends that I created the Identity War game with, Jay Rainville, another comic here in Toronto. He's one of the few people I kind of go to for help. That's not something that I'm good at. I'm not great at asking for help. But when I do, I find it very beneficial. So that's probably the thing I would lean into more, is just like asking for more help from people that I trust to help me, and maybe seeking out more people who I can trust to help me. Because the arrogant part makes it hard for me to choose who to allow to accept advice from. But that's something that I can sort of get around that by just finding more people to ask for help from that I trust and know and like enough to do that. So I think asking for more help, I just it was just recently I had a call with Jay, my one sort of comedic writing partner, and he calls me for advice all the time, and I almost never call him for advice. And I remember when I did, he was like, "Oh my God, you're asking me for advice." He's like, "Hang on, let's sit down and do." Like, he got really almost excited.
Yeah.
And he was very helpful, because he knows a lot more about he's done a lot more study. He knows a lot more about joke structure, about how things are put together more than I do. And so sometimes I'll be like, I think this is funny, but I'm trying to find the way to piece it together, and he'll kind of help me break it down. So I think I need to ask more people for help.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And not just anybody.
No.
People
Yeah.
to your standards.
Yeah.
We were both in a speaking group.
Yeah.
And we both found that beneficial.
Yeah.
Because we could seek out advice directly or indirectly.
Yeah.
From people at our level or higher.
Yeah.
Or from different perspectives.
Where we met was in Philadelphia at a heroic public speaking event.
Yeah.
And Michael and Amy Port, who run
Yeah.
that group, he said something early on that has always stuck with me, which is don't accept advice or criticism from just anyone.
Yeah.
And so that's part of where that comes from, of that, like, okay, I have to choose who I'm going to allow, because, and I made a video about this, and so many people challenged me when I said this. But sometimes people will give what they consider to be constructive criticism. And, they'll say, oh, in your books, you don't put a background image, or in your books, you do this, but maybe you should do this. And I usually respond with, well, you do that with your book. Because my attitude is, you didn't write any books.
Yeah.
You've never published a single book. Telling me what to do with my book is counterproductive for me. So I'm not even going to listen to your criticism. And Michael Port was the one who said, sometimes I walk off stage and after doing an hour keynote, and someone will come up to me and say, I loved your talk. Would you be open to a constructive criticism? And he says, thank you, no. And he doesn't even allow it in. And he said this, and you and I were in the same room when he said this. He said, you should only accept criticism from people in this room who you trust to
Yes.
give it to you.
Yes.
And only when you have asked for it.
Yes.
And I'm a firm believer in that, because I think that you have to choose who you allow to tell you what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong, more importantly. Because if you allow everyone access to that part of you, you can be pushed in too many directions too often.
Yes.
Right? Okay, well, some rando said this to me. And that's happened to me before, where someone will say, you've read the same book 10 times this year, I'm getting sick of it. And then I'll pull back a little bit. But then I realize, well, if I pull back, then I sell less books and I build a following more slowly. Screw that guy. And, and then I do it more, and then he'll say, I'm unfollowing you. Okay, bye. I gained 300 followers today and I lost you. So, there's a willingness to allow the right people to coach and criticize, and and everybody else kind of has to stay out. So my thing is, I don't ask enough of those people for help.
Mm-hmm.
There is a list of people who I would go to, but I don't always go to.
Yeah.
So yeah. That's really insightful.
That's from you. Yeah, it's powerful. And it is, I don't necessarily agree with you are the 5 people you surround yourself with, because I find a lot of people, including me, might not have those 5 people that you trust to think. But I think knowing the people in situations, friends, acquaintances, those you respect and trust, to me, that's more beneficial than putting a number on it.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.